Lieutenant Connor sat in the dimly lit conference room, his eyes scanning the faces of the alien generals gathered around the table. The hum of quiet conversations filled the air as the representatives of Earth's military worked alongside their extraterrestrial allies. Today's meeting was crucial. Humanity's future depended on the outcome of the alliance talks. Across the table sat General Lyra, the leader of the alien forces, known for her fierce reputation in battle. Tall, imposing, with silver skin and sharp features, she exuded the kind of power that could silence a room with a single glance. Her species, the Elarchians, were unmatched in their combat prowess, but their cold, calculated demeanor had made them difficult to approach. Connor had heard stories about General Lyra, but seeing her in person was an entirely different experience. Her commanding presence made him uneasy. She didn't just lead, she inspired fear and respect. The rumors about her were true. She was a warrior at heart, and in her eyes, you could see a lifetime of battles fought and won. The briefing began. Maps of strategic locations were projected onto the large screen, and the representatives began discussing the terms of their military cooperation. Connor sat quietly, trying to focus on the details, but his attention kept drifting back to Lyra. Her focus was unwavering as she scanned the data, analyzing every piece of information with a sharpness that left him in awe. "Lieutenant Connor," a voice interrupted his thoughts. General Lyra's eyes were now on him, piercing through him with a gaze that seemed to challenge him. "You've been briefed on the mission, but do you truly understand what is at stake here? The Elarchian Empire does not make alliances lightly." Connor's throat went dry. He had never been directly addressed by the alien general before, let alone in front of the others. He cleared his throat, trying to maintain his composure. "Yes, General. I understand. This alliance could mean the survival of both our species." Her expression softened slightly, though there was no warmth in it. "Then you should know that actions speak louder than words. We will see if your actions can match the promises." With that, she turned back to the map, her mind already moving to the next phase of the discussion. Connor, however, was left with an uneasy feeling. It wasn't just her authority that had caught him off guard. There was something else, a strange intensity in the way she spoke, the way she moved, even the way she looked at him. The meeting ended with a series of agreements, but Connor couldn't shake the feeling that something more was happening beneath the surface. As he walked out of the room, he noticed Lyra lingering behind, her eyes locking with his for a brief moment. There was no smile, no sign of recognition, just a quiet, unspoken challenge that made his heart race. Whatever had just happened, it was only the beginning. And as he stepped into the corridor, Connor couldn't help but wonder, was it only politics that had brought them together, or was there something more between them that neither could yet admit? Lieutenant Connor sat in the dimly lit conference room, his eyes scanning the faces of the alien generals gathered around the table. The hum of quiet conversations filled the air as the representatives of Earth's military worked alongside their extraterrestrial allies. Today's meeting was crucial. Humanity's future depended on the outcome of the alliance talks. Across the table sat General Lyra, the leader of the alien forces, known for her fierce reputation in battle. Tall, imposing, with silver skin and sharp features, she exuded the kind of power that could silence a room with a single glance. Her species, the Elarchians, were unmatched in their combat prowess, but their cold, calculated demeanor had made them difficult to approach. Connor had heard stories about General Lyra, but seeing her in person was an entirely different experience. Her commanding presence made him uneasy. She didn't just lead, she inspired fear and respect. The rumors about her were true. She was a warrior at heart, and in her eyes, you could see a lifetime of battles fought and won. The briefing began. Maps of strategic locations were projected onto the large screen, and the representatives began discussing the terms of their military cooperation. Connor sat quietly, trying to focus on the details, but his attention kept drifting back to Lyra. Her focus was unwavering as she scanned the data, analyzing every piece of information with a sharpness that left him in awe. "Lieutenant Connor," A voice interrupted his thoughts. General Lyra's eyes were now on him, piercing through him with a gaze that seemed to challenge him. "You've been briefed on the mission, but do you truly understand what is at stake here? The Elarchian Empire does not make alliances lightly." Connor's throat went dry. He had never been directly addressed by the alien general before, let alone in front of the others. He cleared his throat, trying to maintain his composure. "Yes, General. I understand. This alliance could mean the survival of both our species." Her expression softened slightly, though there was no warmth in it. "Then you should know that actions speak louder than words. We will see if your actions can match the promises." With that, she turned back to the map, her mind already moving to the next phase of the discussion. Connor, however, was left with an uneasy feeling. It wasn't just her authority that had caught him off guard. There was something else, a strange intensity in the way she spoke, the way she moved, even the way she looked at him. The meeting ended with a series of agreements, but Connor couldn't shake the feeling that something more was happening beneath the surface. As he walked out of the room, he noticed Lyra lingering behind, her eyes locking with his for a brief moment. There was no smile, no sign of recognition, just a quiet, unspoken challenge that made his heart race. Whatever had just happened, it was only the beginning. And as he stepped into the corridor, Connor couldn't help but wonder, was it only politics that had brought them together, or was there something more between them that neither could yet admit? The sun dipped low over the alien landscape, casting long shadows over the makeshift base, where human and Elarchian forces had been stationed for the past few weeks. The first few days of cooperation had been tense, with soldiers on both sides eyeing each other warily. But as time passed, they began to find common ground, sharing stories, food, and even a few laughs over small victories in their joint efforts. Lieutenant Connor had grown used to the strange, alien environment, but there was something about the nights that still made him uneasy. It was the silence. In the midst of the bustling base during the day, it felt as though the night came alive with strange sounds that he couldn't quite place. Tonight was different, though. The air felt charged with energy. It was the night of their first major joint operation, a test of the newly forged alliance. The mission was risky, but it was essential. If they could pull it off, the cooperation between the humans and the Elarchians would be solidified, and it would mean a significant step toward peace in the galaxy. Connor stood near the briefing area, adjusting his uniform, when he saw General Lyra walking toward him. She was alone, her usual retinue nowhere to be seen. The sight of her, in her dark battle armor, sent a chill down his spine. She was a force of nature, calm, calculated, and fearless. "Lieutenant," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "Are you prepared for tonight?" Connor nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Yes, General. The team is ready." Lyra studied him for a moment, her sharp eyes scanning him as if trying to read his thoughts. "Good. You're not as nervous as I thought you would be. I expected more hesitation from humans." Her words made him pause. "I'm not exactly sure what you mean," he replied. Lyra tilted her head slightly, a small gesture that seemed almost human, though he knew it wasn't. "You are standing in front of me, ready to risk your life for an alliance that your people do not fully understand. Yet you have no fear. Interesting." There was a brief silence between them, a moment that stretched just a little too long. Connor felt his pulse quicken as he realized that Lyra wasn't just talking about the mission. She was talking about something deeper, something personal. "I'm not afraid," Connor said, his voice firm. "I'm doing this for humanity, for peace. If we can work together, maybe we can change the course of history." Lyra's expression softened slightly, though her features remained as stoic as ever. "Peace, yes. Perhaps that is something worth fighting for." The words hung in the air as the two stood there, the tension between them palpable. Connor couldn't deny it. There was something about General Lyra that intrigued him. Her strength, her intelligence, her sense of duty. It was all so different from anything he had ever encountered before. And yet, despite all her power, there was a vulnerability in her eyes that he couldn't ignore. Before he could say anything else, a signal flashed from the command center. The mission was about to begin. Lyra turned and gave him a brief nod. "Let's make this alliance a reality, Lieutenant." As they both walked toward the mission's starting point, Connor couldn't help but wonder if this partnership between their forces was only the beginning of something far more complicated, something that neither of them fully understood yet. The mission had been a success, and the joint operation between the humans and Elarkians had gone off without a hitch. The soldiers from both sides were exhausted but elated. For the first time, there was a sense of camaraderie that hadn't existed before. The soldiers shared drinks, food, and stories under the stars, celebrating their victory. It wasn't just a victory over their enemies. It was a victory for their alliance, and everyone felt it. Lieutenant Connor found himself standing near a large campfire, watching as the flames danced and crackled in the cool night air. He had never felt so out of place, yet so welcomed at the same time. The humans and Elarkians were mingling, talking, laughing, and trading small tokens of respect. An alien trinket here, a human artifact there. It was an uneasy peace, but it was peace nonetheless. Connor's gaze drifted across the firelight to where General Lyra stood. She was surrounded by a group of Elarkian officers, but her eyes were fixed on him. She didn't look away when their gazes met. There was something unsettling, yet magnetic, about the way she watched him. Her silver eyes seemed to cut through the noise of the celebration, and for a moment, it felt as though it was just the two of them in the entire galaxy. He took a step toward her, but then hesitated. What could he say to her? They had already shared a battle, but something about her presence always left him with a feeling he couldn't quite place. Suddenly, Lyra's voice broke through the crowd. "Lieutenant Connor, I'd like a word." Connor felt a jolt of surprise shoot through him. He nodded, his heart pounding a little faster than usual as he made his way through the crowd. Lyra stood apart from the group of officers, her posture as strong and commanding as always, but there was something different about her tonight. Her usually hard gaze had softened slightly, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of warmth in her expression. It caught him off guard. "General," he greeted, trying to maintain his usual composure. "It's good to see you. We did it." Lyra gave him a slight nod. "Yes, it seems we did. You and your people performed admirably." Connor felt a strange warmth spread through him at her words. "Thank you." It was a team effort. She stepped a little closer, and the warmth between them seemed to increase. "I know. It's strange, isn't it? I've spent my life leading armies, but this alliance, it feels different. I feel something more than just the weight of responsibility." Connor blinked, unsure what she meant. "What do you mean?" Lyra paused for a moment, her eyes studying him as though she were trying to decide whether or not to speak. She seemed to weigh her words carefully before continuing. "I think you and I both know that this," she gestured around them, indicating the party and the alliances made, "is not just about politics and strategy. There is something else. Something unspoken." Connor swallowed. The air between them had shifted, and his chest tightened. He felt that same electricity from earlier, but it was stronger now, more undeniable. He wasn't sure what to say, so he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. Lyra glanced around the campfire, as if making sure no one was listening. "I spent so many years fighting, leading, living with my people's expectations. But now, with you, I wonder if I've been missing something." Connor's heart pounded. The general was confessing something personal, something far beyond the duties of a soldier. And for the first time, it felt like she was speaking to him as a person, not just a military leader. "General, He was about to speak, but Lyra placed a hand gently on his arm, silencing him. "I'm not asking for answers, Lieutenant. I just needed to say it." She looked up at him, her eyes now softening in a way he had never seen before. "You've changed something in me tonight." The warmth between them lingered in the air as the sounds of the celebration continued around them. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. It felt as though they were both unsure of what to say next, yet neither could move away from the undeniable connection that had formed between them. Finally, Lyra pulled her hand back, her gaze returning to the fire. "Let's just leave it at that for now." Connor nodded, still processing what had just happened. It was clear that whatever had begun between them, it wasn't just about alliances or politics. Something deeper, something more personal, was forming, and neither of them knew where it would lead. As Lyra walked back to her officers, Connor stood frozen for a moment, feeling the weight of the unspoken bond between them. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain: everything had changed. The morning sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden light over the camp. The previous night's celebration still lingered in the air, but the usual noise of soldiers preparing for the day was mixed with a strange tension. Lieutenant Connor woke up early, feeling the weight of the night before hanging over him. He had tried to focus on the mission, on the success they'd achieved together, but there had been too much uncertainty. The words Lyra had spoken to him echoed in his mind, leaving him both unsettled and intrigued. He couldn't deny it. There had been something in the air between them, something neither of them had fully addressed. As he stepped out of his tent, Connor scanned the camp. Soldiers were bustling around, getting ready for the day's duties, but his eyes couldn't help but search for Lyra. He found her near the command center, speaking with her officers. She looked every bit the warrior, commanding attention with her presence alone. But this time, there was something different. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the world around them had quieted. The connection was still there, stronger, perhaps, after last night. But Lyra quickly turned away, her usual expression of control and strength returning. Connor felt a pang of confusion. Why had she been so open last night, and now seemed so distant? He walked toward her, his steps slow but determined. When he reached her side, she didn't look up immediately, focusing instead on a datapad in her hands. "General." Connor greeted her, his voice calm but carrying the weight of the night's events. Lyra glanced up at him, her eyes quickly darting away as if to avoid being caught in an uncomfortable moment. "Lieutenant," she said, her tone professional, yet something in her voice seemed strained. There was a long silence between them. Connor could feel it. This was more than just a morning after a mission. Something had shifted, but neither of them knew how to navigate it. "I don't want to make this awkward," Connor began, unsure if he was even ready to say what was on his mind. "Last night, what we talked about, what happened, it feels different today, doesn't it?" Lyra stiffened slightly but didn't say anything at first. She took a deep breath before responding, her voice quieter than usual. "We are soldiers, Lieutenant. Leaders. We cannot afford to let personal feelings interfere with our duties." Her words hit him like a cold splash of water. He knew she was right. This was bigger than the two of them. Their roles as leaders came first, but Connor couldn't shake the feeling that something more was brewing beneath the surface. "I understand," he said, his voice steady, though his mind raced. "But, General, what if it's not just about our roles? What if there's something more here, something that can't be ignored?" Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at him for a long moment, her eyes softer than usual, though she quickly masked it with her usual icy composure. "We'll see," she said finally, her voice almost a whisper. Before he could respond, a loud call came from across the camp. The mission's next phase was ready to begin, and both of them were needed. Lyra turned away, her focus snapping back to the task at hand. But Connor saw the fleeting glance she threw back at him. It was brief, but it spoke volumes. He watched as she walked away, her figure disappearing into the crowd of officers. Connor stood still, his heart heavy with the weight of their unspoken words. Whatever had started between them, it wasn't going to be easy. But one thing was certain: he couldn't walk away from it. Neither of them could. The days following the mission were filled with a sense of quiet unease. The camp buzzed with activity, preparations for the next phase of the alliance. Yet, Lieutenant Connor couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, not just in the camp, but within himself and, more importantly, with General Lyra. They hadn't spoken much since their brief conversation that morning, but there was an undeniable tension between them. It hung in the air, unspoken and unresolved. Connor's thoughts often drifted to her. She was a woman of power, strength, and control. Yet there was something in her eyes that night, something vulnerable that she rarely showed. He wondered what she had meant when she said, "We'll see." What were they both waiting for? It was during one of the quieter evenings, when the stars were beginning to appear in the sky, that Lyra approached him again. This time, she was alone, her usual entourage absent. She stood a few feet away from Connor, watching him intently. Her presence was commanding, but there was an unfamiliar softness to her stance. "Lieutenant," she began, her voice low, almost as if she were testing the waters, "there is something I need to explain to you. Something personal." Connor's curiosity piqued. He stood up straighter, giving her his full attention. "What is it, General?" Lyra glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. "I did not intend for our conversation to carry this weight, but it seems it has. And now I must explain why." Connor frowned, unsure of where this was leading, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. She sighed, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "In my culture, we have a ritual, a tradition, if you will. It is not something spoken of lightly. It is a bond, formed between warriors and leaders, a joining of sorts. When two beings, especially those of different species, engage in this ritual, it is said to strengthen not only the individuals but the entire alliance." Connor blinked, surprised by the words. "What kind of ritual are you talking about? What does it mean?" Lyra met his eyes again, her expression serious. "It means that once the bond is formed, there is no going back. It is a deep connection, one that transcends duty, one that goes beyond the battlefield. It is personal. It involves trust, respect, and more." Her words left him momentarily speechless. The weight of her confession settled over him, and Connor could see the vulnerability she was trying so hard to hide. This wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was something more, something neither of them could easily ignore. "Are you saying you want me to participate in this ritual?" he asked, his voice a mix of confusion and curiosity. Lyra nodded slowly, her gaze unwavering. "Not want. It is not a matter of desire. It is a necessity for the alliance, for the future of both our people, and it is something we must both choose. But I cannot ask you without explaining it to you first. It is not just a ceremony. It is a bond that will affect us both." Connor's heart raced. This was more than just an agreement between two armies. This was something ancient, something that could change everything between them. He wasn't sure what to say. What could he say? "I'm not sure I understand," Connor admitted, his voice uncertain. "But I'll listen. I need to know more before making any decision." Lyra took a deep breath, a brief flicker of something softer crossing her features. "I know, and I'm not asking you to decide now. Just understand that this could be the beginning of something far more than either of us expected." As she turned to leave, Connor stood there, his mind racing. The bond she spoke of wasn't just about their alliance. It was about them. Something had shifted between them, and now he had to decide if he was ready to embrace it or walk away. But deep down, he knew that whatever choice he made, it would change the course of everything, both for him and for General Lyra. The days following the revelation about the ritual were tense. Connor found himself caught between his duty as a soldier and the strange, growing connection he felt with General Lyra. He couldn't stop thinking about her words, about the bond she had described. What did it mean for them? And what would it mean for the future of the alliance between the humans and the Elarkians? The camp was busy with preparations for the next phase of the alliance. The leaders were working to formalize the terms of their cooperation, but there was a sense of unease in the air. The success of the mission had given both sides a sense of hope, but it was clear that not everyone was fully on board with this alliance. There were still many on both sides who saw the other as an enemy, and they were determined to prevent the alliance from moving forward. One evening, as Connor stood near the command center, waiting for orders, he was approached by Captain Moran, his commanding officer. Moran was a tall man with a no-nonsense attitude, and Connor could tell by the look on his face that something serious was about to happen. "Lieutenant," Moran began, his voice low, "we need to talk. The higher-ups are starting to get nervous about this alliance. Some of the military leaders on both sides are questioning whether it's worth continuing. They're not convinced this is a good idea." Connor frowned. "What are you saying?" "The alliance has been successful so far. We've proven we can work together." Moran shook his head. "It's not about the mission anymore. Some of the higher-ups think it's too risky. The humans and Elarkans are too different. There are too many differences in our cultures. And now, with this bond, this ritual that Lyra is talking about, things are getting complicated." Connor's stomach tightened. He knew exactly what Moran meant. The political ramifications of the bond were impossible to ignore. If this alliance was going to survive, they would have to make sure their relationship, whatever it was, didn't threaten the fragile peace between their people. "And what do you want me to do?" Connor asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just walk away from her, from everything we've worked for." Moran looked at him, his expression hardening. "I don't want you to walk away, but you need to understand that this alliance is about more than just you and Lyra. It's about the future of both our species. If things get too personal, it could destroy everything we've built." Connor's heart pounded. He knew Moran was right. As much as he had come to respect Lyra, and even feel something deeper for her, their bond could be a threat to the alliance. He wasn't sure if he was ready to make such a huge decision, but the pressure was mounting. "You need to think about what's best for both sides, Lieutenant," Moran added, his voice softer. "This isn't just about one mission or one relationship. It's about the future." Connor nodded, his mind racing. He didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. The choice he would make in the coming days could change everything, not just for him and Lyra, but for both humanity and the Elarkans. As Moran walked away, Connor stood alone, the weight of his decision settling heavily on his shoulders. He had always been a soldier, following orders without question. But now, for the first time, he was faced with a decision that had nothing to do with orders. It was about the future, and it was about his heart. The days that followed the conversation with Captain Moran were a blur for Lieutenant Connor. He couldn't shake the pressure that had been building around him. On one hand, there was the alliance, the fragile hope that humanity and the Elarkans could find common ground, end their long history of conflict, and work toward a peaceful future. On the other hand, there was the bond, the ritual Lyra had spoken about. He didn't know what to make of it, but it was clear that it was becoming impossible to ignore. Every time Connor saw General Lyra, there was a tension in the air. They would exchange nods, and occasionally their eyes would meet, but neither of them spoke about what had happened. It was as though they were pretending that nothing had changed, but in reality, everything had. The connection between them was undeniable, and both of them knew it, but neither of them seemed ready to admit it. One evening, after a long day of strategy meetings and tactical planning, Connor found himself walking alone through the camp. The sounds of the soldiers winding down for the night filled the air, but his mind was elsewhere. He needed answers, answers that he wasn't sure Lyra was willing to give. He had tried to stay focused on the mission, but the questions kept swirling in his head. As he walked past the rows of tents, he saw Lyra standing near the edge of the camp, looking out at the horizon. Her posture was as strong as ever, but there was something different about her tonight. She seemed lost in thought, her gaze distant, as though she were carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Without thinking, Connor approached her, his footsteps soft on the ground. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, but he knew he couldn't keep pretending that nothing had changed. "General," he called softly. Lyra turned at the sound of his voice, her eyes meeting his with a mix of surprise and something else, something that might have been relief. She didn't speak at first, but there was a brief moment where the world around them seemed to fade. "Lieutenant," she finally said, her voice calm but filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "What brings you here?" Connor hesitated, his hands instinctively clenching at his sides. He had come here to talk, to understand what was happening between them, but now that he was standing in front of her, the words felt harder to say. "I can't keep pretending that things haven't changed between us," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of uncertainty. "I know we're both trying to ignore it, but I can't. Not anymore." Lyra's expression softened, though she quickly masked it with a slight tilt of her head. "You think I don't know that?" she asked quietly. "I'm a general, Lieutenant. I've led armies. I've faced threats that would break most people. But this is different." Connor's heart skipped a beat. "Then what do we do? Where do we go from here?" Lyra paused, her eyes scanning the horizon once more before returning to him. "I don't have all the answers, Connor, but I know that I'm not ready to let go of this, of whatever it is that's forming between us. We both have a role to play in this alliance, but that doesn't mean we have to ignore what's happening between us." Her words were a weight lifted from his shoulders, yet at the same time, it left him with even more uncertainty. He didn't have the answers either, but for the first time, he realized he wasn't alone in feeling this way. "Then let's figure it out together," he said, his voice firm with a new sense of resolve. "One step at a time. We don't have to have everything figured out right now." Lyra nodded, her gaze softening. "Agreed. But whatever happens, we face it together, as allies." For the first time in days, Connor felt a sense of peace settle within him. There were still many questions ahead, but now, at least he knew they didn't have to face them alone. And in that moment, with the stars overhead and the promise of a future uncertain but full of possibility, Connor knew that the bond between them wasn't something they could easily ignore. It was something that would shape the future of the alliance and of them both. The camp was quiet that night, the usual bustle of military life replaced by a calm that hung in the air like a fragile thread. Soldiers had finished their duties, and the flicker of campfires illuminated the darkness. It felt like the calm before a storm, but the only storm that Connor could feel brewing was within himself. The conversation he'd had with Lyra earlier that day still echoed in his mind. They had agreed to face whatever came next together, but Connor couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her words than she had let on. The night was cool, the stars above shining like pinpricks in the vastness of the sky. Connor sat near the edge of the camp, just outside the light of the fires, his eyes lost in thought. His mind kept returning to Lyra, the way she had looked at him, the unspoken understanding between them. It was clear now that this wasn't just about the alliance anymore. Something deeper had formed between them, and neither of them was sure how to handle it. Connor stood up and stretched, deciding he needed to clear his head. As he walked away from the campfire, his boots crunching softly on the gravel beneath him, he saw a figure in the distance. Lyra. She was standing alone, just beyond the reach of the camp's lights, staring out into the night. Something in him urged him forward. Without thinking, he moved towards her. When she heard him approaching, Lyra turned her head slightly, acknowledging his presence without a word. The usual walls around her were back in place, but Connor could see the faint tension in her shoulders. He knew she was still carrying the weight of everything that had been left unsaid between them. "General," Connor greeted quietly, stopping a few feet away from her. Lyra didn't respond at first, but after a long moment, she nodded in his direction. "Lieutenant." The silence between them was heavy, filled with thoughts that neither of them had yet fully shared. Connor glanced up at the stars, trying to find the right words. He wasn't sure what he had expected tonight, but it certainly wasn't this quiet standoff between two people who knew far too much about each other and yet, at the same time, still didn't know where they stood. "It's strange, isn't it?" Connor said softly. how we can be so close and yet still feel like we're miles apart. Lyra sighed, her gaze still fixed on the sky. Yes, it's as if we've built something, but neither of us knows how to finish it. Connor nodded, taking a step closer. We don't have to figure everything out tonight. Lyra looked at him then, her silver eyes reflecting the light of the stars above. There was a brief flicker of something, softness, vulnerability, that Connor had never seen before. No, she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. We don't. The weight of her words settled in the space between them. They both knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be challenges to face, not just with the Alliance, but with their own feelings. But at least, for the first time, they weren't running from it. They were standing together, even if it was just in this brief moment of silence. The night stretched on, but neither of them spoke again. The air between them felt charged, but not with tension. It was a quiet understanding, a recognition that whatever happened next, they were no longer alone in facing it. There was no clarity, no resolution, but there was a promise that they would face whatever came, side by side. As the night wore on, they stood there together, the silence now comfortable. The world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them under the endless sky. And for the first time, Connor didn't feel so alone. He had found someone to stand with, someone who understood the weight of this strange, uncertain journey they were on. And as the stars shimmered overhead, he knew that, somehow, they would figure it out together. The days following the quiet night under the stars passed in a blur. The alliance between humans and Elarkians was growing stronger with each passing mission, but Lieutenant Connor could feel the pressure building within himself. The conversations with Lyra had left him with more questions than answers. They had both agreed to move forward together. But what did that really mean? Was it just an alliance, or was it something deeper? Something neither of them could ignore. The camp was alive with preparations for the next phase of their joint efforts. The sounds of soldiers working, moving supplies, and strategizing filled the air, but Connor felt detached from it all. His mind kept drifting back to Lyra. Her eyes, her words, the way she had opened up to him in a way he hadn't expected. It wasn't just the bond between their species that was growing. There was something else, something he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. It was late one evening when he saw her again. Lyra was standing near the command center, her back straight, her eyes scanning the horizon. The usual calm and confident demeanor she carried with her was still in place, but there was something different about her. She looked tired, not physically, but emotionally. Connor had never seen her like this before. It was as if the weight of their responsibilities, of their connection, had finally caught up with her. Without thinking, Connor made his way over to her. As he approached, Lyra turned slightly, as if she had sensed his presence. Her gaze met his, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "General," Connor said quietly, trying to break the silence. Lyra nodded, but her usual sharpness seemed to soften just a little. "Lieutenant." There was a long pause. Neither of them knew how to begin, but the moment felt too important to let it pass. "I've been thinking about everything," Connor started, his voice low but steady. "About what you said. About this bond between us." Lyra's eyes flickered, and for a moment, it looked like she might turn away. But she didn't. She waited for him to continue. "I'm not sure what it means," he admitted. "I'm not even sure what I want it to mean. But I can't deny it anymore. There's something between us. Something that's more than just this alliance." Lyra's expression softened, and she took a small step closer. "I know. I've felt it too." Connor's heart skipped a beat at her words. For so long, they had danced around it. But now, there was no more hiding from the truth. "Then why are we pretending?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Why are we holding back? What are we waiting for?" Lyra's gaze dropped to the ground for a brief moment, as though she were gathering her thoughts. When she looked back at him, there was a vulnerability in her eyes that he had never seen before. "I'm scared," she said quietly, almost too quietly for him to hear. "Scared," Connor repeated, his voice filled with concern. "Scared of what?" "Scared of what this could mean," she said, her voice shaky now. "Scared of what it could cost us. To ourselves, to the Alliance, to everything we've worked for." Connor took a deep breath, his hand instinctively reaching out to her. "But it's already happening, Lyra. We can't ignore it anymore. And I don't want to. I don't want to keep pretending that we don't feel this connection. Whatever happens, we face it together. The Alliance, the bond, all of it." Lyra's eyes searched his face, as though she were looking for something. And then, after a long silence, she nodded. "You're right. We've been pretending for too long." Connor took a step closer, his heart pounding. "Then let's stop pretending." Without another word, he reached for her hand, the touch both tentative and certain. Lyra didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed his hand, and for the first time, the weight that had been hanging between them seemed to lift. The future was still uncertain. There were still battles to be fought, challenges to face. But in that moment, as their hands touched, it was clear that whatever came next, they would face it together. And that was more than enough for both of them. The confession had changed everything, not just for them, but for the future of the Alliance. And now, they would navigate this uncertain path together, side by side.